Hi, we are starting on chapter 2 here, page 21, where it says real property versus personal property. The first thing that the book talks about is manufactured housing, mobile homes. We touched on that in chapter 1. It's just important to know for the test that a mobile home, manufactured home, is personal property. Usually when it's brand new and sold to someone. It's not attached to the ground. Sometimes it has wheels on. Sometimes a manufactured home comes in just large chunks and is not even on wheels. But when you purchase that, you're purchasing personal property. When you put it together or take the wheels off of it and place it on land and usually attach utilities to it, then that manufactured home becomes real property. The next distinction we want to talk about is fixtures. And it's important to know what is personal property and what is real property. And this is one of the things that will be argued about the most in your real life if you're going to be an agent or a broker. Fixtures by law goes with the real property, and personal property does not. So a typical thing to think about when you're selling a house is, do the appliances, i.e. the washer, the dryer, the dishwasher, microwave, stove, and refrigerator, are those fixtures or are those personal property? And in Ohio, like most states, most of those items are personal property because they're not permanently affixed to the property. Certainly a built-in dishwasher or a built-in microwave would be a fixture, but mostly a refrigerator, stove, washer, dryer, countertop, microwave, all of those things, a movable dishwasher that's on wheels, those are all personal property. And if you want those, if your client wants those when they're purchasing the house, they need to be written in the contract. There's a specific line on the purchase contract that says, and the following personal property shall be included. And that's where you would list all of those items. And my recommendation is, if there's ever a question as to whether it's personal property or a fixture, go ahead and write it in as personal property so that there's no question, no argument on whether it is a fixture. Some things are really easy to figure out whether it's a fixture or not. Other things are not. The first thing, you need to read your purchase contract, and it outlines everything that stays with the house. And if the seller doesn't want certain things to stay with the house, it needs to be deleted or scratched through. Some things that by the Ohio contract that's prescribed, that's included to stay with the house are play sets, which to me are very, very expensive items. I don't know if I would personally think of that as a fixture or part of the real property, but if you want to take that with you or your client wants to take that with you, that needs to be struck. Curtains, curtain rods, much of that, not always the curtains, but definitely the curtain rods are usually deemed to be fixtures and stay with the house. So let's get into a little of the technical things about fixtures, and then we'll talk about some more examples. Fixtures, the definition at near the bottom of page 22 says it's personal property that has been so attached to the land or a building that by law it becomes a part of the real property. And again, examples of fixtures are heating systems, elevator equipment, radiators, kitchen cabinets, light fixtures, chandeliers. Those are kind of easy to figure out. Like I said, some of the other things are not quite as easy to figure out. Ohio and most states look at a number of different items in determining whether it's a fixture or not, and those items are set forth on page 23. For purposes of the test, the state exam, You need to understand that the most important item that the court looks at is the intention of the affixer, i.e., what did the person who bought this item, attached this item to the real property, what was their intent when they attached it to the property. If it was, that has to be objective intent, not subjective. You can't wait until you get ready to sell the house and say, oh, of course I meant to take that with me. You look at all of the facts back at the time when it was actually attached. But let's go through the different types of, or the different categories that a court will look at. They look at the method of annexation. Annexation just means affixing it. So how permanent is that method of affixing the property, the personal property, to the real property, and thus turning it into real property? Adaptability of the item for the land's ordinary use. So is the item used as real property or personal property? The example the book uses is a refrigerator considered personal property? If a refrigerator has been adapted to match the kitchen cabinets, probably that's real property, and it's a fixture. But if it's a typical off-the-shelf or off-the-floor refrigerator, no matter how nice, it is typically then personal property. Relationship of the parties. The court does look at the relationship of the parties, and if there's ever any hesitation or discrepancy as far as is this a fixture or not, this is how the court usually goes. Between a buyer and the seller, they usually lean towards the buyer. And the reason they lean towards the buyer and say it's personal property is they say, I can't, the judge says, I can't get into the mind of the buyer. How do I know that when the buyer walked in the house and saw that chandelier, that made the deal for them, that they absolutely, they love the house, but they fell in love with it when they saw the chandelier? So again, between a buyer and a seller, a court will lean and favor a buyer over a seller. Between a tenant and a landlord, a court will typically lean towards the tenant, and this is in a residential situation, thinking that, a tenant doesn't own the property, and if they put something into the property, their intent likely was that this was not going to stay here and improve somebody else's property. So if a tenant came in and took down the existing chandelier and put in a new light fixture, that tenant would more than likely have the right to take that light fixture out when he left, and as long as he replaces it with the original or another similar light fixture or chandelier, then he's fine. But again, in in residential situations, a court usually thinks that when a tenant installs something, that he intends to take it with him when he leaves. A little bit different if he installs something like builds a deck onto the back of the house. There are a lot of tenants that stay with houses, rent houses for long periods of time and kind of view it as their own. And if a tenant would do that and build on a deck and live there another 5 years and then leave, that tenant, a court would not allow that tenant to basically tear down that deck and take all the wood with them. That would definitely be a fixture that would stay with the property. Intention of the person putting the item on the land. Again, that is the most important consideration that the Ohio Supreme Court looks at. If an installation is intended to be temporary, it should not be it should not be attached in a way that appears to be permanent. So let's think about this. Let's say you have a Persian rug that's a runner and you want to put it in your hallway, in your front hallway when you walk into the house, and it's hardwood floors. So if you would tack it down with little tacks on the corners so that it doesn't slide and people fall on it, that is not a fixture just because it was quote unquote affixed to the property. That was always the intention of attaching that was for purposes to keep it in place, not to make it permanent. Another example is I love to garden, and my outside, my backyard is full of garden things, and we have a pergola and a fireplace and patio furniture. Hold on.